So Jews have been giving each other a hard time for a long time. This is probably not news. Jews have been giving each other a hard time since Hillel and Shammai had it out. You light one candle, then two candles, then three candles, then four candles. No, you light 8, then 7, then 6, then 5. Let's keep talking about that argument for 2,000 years. They have been giving each other a hard time since rationalists and mystics duked it out. We continue to give each other a hard time to this day. One of the great debates in Jewish life, in Jewish history, and in fact one of the ugliest over the course of our history, was between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim. The Hasidic movement emerges in the 1700s, first in Ukraine and spreading throughout Eastern Europe, a movement of personal piety, of ecstatic joy, of song and dance, of taking the insights of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, and taking them from totally abstract to deeply personal. It was a movement characterized by some of the most incredible personalities ever in Jewish history, the great Rebbes, the Baal Shem Tov, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, many, many more. And they were not universally beloved. There was a school of Jews in the same area that found their singing and dancing, that found their insistence that God was close and available at all times, who found their psychologizing of Kabbalah all to be quite offensive. They called themselves Mitnagdim, the opponents of the Hasidim, and in fact, at various times issued bans of cherem, issued bans of excommunication upon the leaders of the Hasidic world and anybody who dared to follow them. Among the many sins, I put that in big quotes, that the Mitnagdim said that the Hasidim transgressed, was a lack of careful attention to time. In our Jewish tradition, there are many opinions about when you're supposed to do something, a particular mitzvah, but there is in the legal tradition no debate that certain mitzvot do have a time window in order to be done correctly. Your Shema is supposed to be said after a certain time in the morning and before a certain time in the morning. And if you don't say your Shema during that window, bismano, in its time, it doesn't count. Or at least it doesn't count the same way. Similarly, there's a debate about what is the appropriate interval in which you can say the Amidah. Similarly, there's a debate about when you're supposed to sit in the sukkah or when you're supposed to eat matzah on the first night of Passover. When exactly that time interval falls, Rabbi A says this, Rabbi B says that, Rabbi C says you don't know what you're talking about, but all of them agree that there is a time interval in which the mitzvah has its maximum potency. The Hasidim say, that's exactly right, Rabbi Einstein, time advisory. Because what if it's the time to say Shema in the morning, but there happens to be an unbelievably glorious sunset, or sunrise? What if you just need to spend that hour when you should be saying the Shema, contemplating the sunrise? How could you turn away from this unbelievable sunrise and turn to your book? You'll get to the Shema after you're done contemplating the sunrise. What if it's evening time and you're supposed to say your evening Amidah, but you were together with your community and you were singing in ecstatic joy, and the time is ticking away, but you're still singing? Are you supposed to cut off your singing in order to say the words in the book? Keep singing. God will listen late. God stays up late at night. The Hasidim were famously not so concerned about doing things in their particular exact time. Now, I didn't come from a super religious family, but I have a guess that we were Hasidim way back in the day. I have a guess because time has always been a little bit more advisory in my family than rigidly enforced. Last night I was with my parents and we were looking through some old pictures and old papers, and one of the things they didn't find, but they've shown me another time when we did a similar exercise, was my bris certificate. And if you look at my bris certificate, and you count the days from my birthday to the bris certificates, it turns out it's not exactly 8. I think it was like 10 or 11. Because my grandparents, who hosted the bris, who had to wait until their 70s to have a first grandchild, that was me, apparently had a social engagement on day 8. And so they figured they'd been waiting for a grandchild for 70 years. It can wait 3 more days for a bris. Thankfully, the halakha is that if you do a bris late, you don't need a do-over. If you do it early, you're in trouble. Late, you're fine. Otherwise, I would seriously hold that against them. But time intervals, maybe not the most important thing in my Judaism. And maybe some of you are in a similar place. Why am I talking about this? Because the Talmud says that while you're supposed to get in all of your tshuva at the High Holy Day season, by the time the gates lock at Ne'ilah at the end of Yom Kippur, really, actually, we could probably extend the time frame to the end of Sukkot. There's an ideal time frame from Rosh Hashanah, from the New Year, to Yom Kippur to get in your tshuva. But if you need an extra week and a half to the end of Sukkot, fine, you can take it. The real locking of the gates comes at Shmini Atzeret, my father's favorite holiday. The Hasidim come along and say, if we can extend the time frame to Shmini Atzeret, maybe we could also extend the time frame a little bit longer for those of us who are not so good with deadlines. How about until the end of Hanukkah? The Hasidic masters said, yeah, you can get your tshuva in anytime between Rosh Hashanah and Zot Hanukkah, the 8th night of Hanukkah. But by the time those last 8 candles go out, you had really better do your tshuva. It's Erev secular New Year's. I want to give you one last extension. In the spirit of my imagined Hasidic ancestors, I want to give you one last extension to say, if there's any tshuva work that you started way back at our New Year's and really had intended to get done by the locking of the gates at Ne'ilah, but that week just kind of got away from you, and then you put off to Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, but you were hosting a lot of guests in your sukkah. There were a lot of meals to be made. You were a little distracted and you didn't get to it. If you pushed it off till Hanukkah, but November and December got really busy, here we are. You have a few more hours before one more, totally artificial, deadline. One more moment when you could say, okay, this is it. I'm going to get my tshuva in now. I'm going to make that phone call I've been putting off and putting off and putting off. I'm going to make that appointment I've been putting off and putting off and putting off. I'm going to actually sit down and do a little bit of internal work, or reach out to another and do a little bit of relationship work. I want to give us that sense that this afternoon actually has magical possibility. The Torah portion this week is about deferred tshuva, isn't it? It's about a breakdown of relationship that didn't happen overnight. It happened between Yosef and his brothers over the course of years. It happened as a result of unwise parental love, unevenly distributed. It happened as a result of the smallness and pettiness which can even exist within families, which sometimes especially exists within families. A rupture, a horrific rupture. A brother sold away. A lie told to a father that his son was dead. A period of estrangement that lasted decades you would think it was too late. You would think it was way too late for anything to possibly be fixed. How could anything be fixed after 20 years, after all they'd been through, after all of this life and all of this pain and all of these tears and all of this longing and all of this regret? How could they even start? How could they even dare to try? And yet this parsha says that they found a way. They found a way to embrace. They found a way to weep together. Yosef found a way to say to his brothers, you know, everything wound up working out for the best. I didn't like how it went down, but maybe it was God's plan all along. Yaakov got to see his son again before he died. That doesn't mean everything was okay. That doesn't mean what was done was okay. That doesn't mean that everybody is back to happy like they were before, like they maybe never were. But they found a way to do the work which had been delayed all those many, many, many years, to set things a little more right. One of my big challenges in the world is that when I've dropped the ball on something, I tend to keep putting off making it right because I get more and more ashamed of the fact that it's been so long and I haven't made it right. I think about this student who was a year ahead of me in rabbinical school, who was diagnosed with a terrible cancer, and over the course of 9 months got sicker and sicker and ultimately died, leaving 3 small children. In the first few weeks after Joel got sick, most of my classmates went to the hospital to visit him. And I thought, I don't know him that well. I don't know if I should be there right in this time of great pain. I'll go later. But by that point, almost everybody had been to visit him. And I started thinking it would feel awkward to show up and say, I haven't been here, but now I'm here. And so I waited a little bit longer out of my discomfort. And a little bit longer became a little bit longer, and months went by of rabbinical students gathering on Friday afternoon and singing Kabbalat Shabbat with Joel and go. Because if I had gone, I had to own up to all the time that had passed, or at least in my brain, I had to own up to all the time that's passed. I never went. I lived 9 months and never went. I'm probably not the only one who's ever done that. Who's ever put something off and thought, I can't fix it now. It's been so much time. So much has happened. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. We can be chassids with time. We can say, yes, there's an interval for saying your Shema, and yes, there's an interval for doing your tshuva, and yes, there's an interval for showing up at the hospital when your friend is sick. But if you miss that window, still better to say the Shema, still better to make your tshuva, still better to show up. We can push it a little bit further, and a little bit further, because the alternative is to do nothing at all. We have a few more hours before the end of the year. What are we waiting for? Shabbat Shalom.